Thanks so much, John, for the introduction, and also to all of you for the opportunity to talk to you today about one of the more pressing issues we're facing, which is how climate change is impacting our water supplies, both in California, across the West, but certainly globally as well. And this is also a great opportunity for me to be able to talk to you about some of the work that Environmental Defense Fund is doing to tackle this issue head on and develop a more resilient water and land systems so that we can have viable agricultural sectors, we can have healthy communities, and we can have thriving ecosystems. So I'm going to be touching on all of that in this talk today. So in terms of the outline, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who Environmental Defense Fund is, the programs we focus on, and our approach, and then I'll dive right into the climate change impacts that we're facing on water in California, and particularly how it's impacting our somewhat complex water system in the state. And then I'll touch on climate change impacts on water more broadly in the West, and then what's happening globally. And then I'll open it up for a discussion about what all of you can do individually to really lean in on this issue if you're interested, and perhaps what the Rotary Club can do as an organization. I'll just upfront say I am going to be focusing a lot on what's going on in California. That's the program I lead, but importantly, the challenges and opportunities that we are facing in California definitely can be transferred to other places in the West and certainly globally as well. So keep that in mind when I'm talking about the situation in California. So a little bit about Environmental Defense Fund. We are a non-governmental organization that's been around for over 50 years. We bring together science and economics to develop pragmatic solutions that really aim to reward people for protecting the environment as opposed to exploiting it. We work both nationally and increasingly internationally. We are really working on developing bipartisan solutions, which we advocate for at the state and federal level, and we build partnerships with stakeholders across sectors, including businesses. We work in 4 main areas. Our energy program is aimed at fighting climate change and coming up with a way to accelerate a clean energy economy. Our oceans program is fighting overfishing, tackling that challenge globally. Our health program is focused on decreasing exposure to pollutants and toxic chemicals by reforming public policy. And then finally, our ecosystems program, of which I am a part, is really working on protecting a growing population in a changing climate so that we can have agricultural and rural communities that are healthy and resilient, and that we have thriving ecosystems to support all of that. So EDF's water program, we have 3 main geographies where we are currently working: in California, in the upper and lower Colorado River Basin, and in Texas. We are in the process of expanding our work to the Pacific Northwest and New Mexico, and internationally we're exploring Mexico and India. Our work focuses really in those areas where irrigating agriculture is the primary water use and where water scarcity is a pressing issue. Across these geographies, our goals are to rebalance these water systems and make them more resilient to climate change so that we can have a future where it is better for people and nature, and that we can prepare for the changing climate that is upon us. So on the topic of climate change, let's put things in context as to what we're experiencing all around us in California and certainly in the West. I'm sure those of us on this call who were here to experience the last drought of 2012 through 2016 can remember some of the conservation actions we took. I know we took out our lawn and did some xeriscaping. We reduced how often we were washing our cars and shortened our showers and all of that. Well, after 2 consecutive dry winters, we are staring down another drought. And news of this is making headlines again. I'm sure many of you have noticed that. This is actually an image of Lake Shasta from this past February. And actually lower in the system is Lake Oroville. I don't know if some of you may have been hearing that, that's also a popular houseboating destination. They are now, in the past couple of weeks, starting to remove houseboats from that reservoir because they're afraid they're going to get stuck on the lake bed as water levels decrease. So this is now kind of the new norm that we're facing. You may have also heard that Governor Newsom declared recently a drought emergency in 41 of the state's 58 counties and proposed a $5.1 billion drought response package to fund projects to not only address what we're facing immediately in front of us, but also to develop long-term solutions so that we're not constantly in this crisis mode that we're facing right now. And I will discuss all of that more in this talk. So this headline and quote kind of puts a finer point on what California more broadly, the West is facing right now. Drought is and will continue to be the big story in the West as various interests are competing for the limited water we have. We are already seeing this. It's only the second year of the drought, and it's highly likely this will be a multi-year drought period that we're entering into. So it does not bode well for the types of conflict that are ahead for us as we address or as we face this challenge. The thing is, though, that this drought really shouldn't come as a surprise. This sort of variability in precipitation has become fairly typical for us in this state. Here's a satellite image from February 2019 of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Here it is from a year later. I think those skiers and snowboarders out there probably know well what that variability looks like on the ground. I know this last season I was kind of blown away by how different the snowpack looked compared to the year prior. Interestingly, even historically, California's rain and snowfall patterns have been incredibly variable. In fact, the most variable in the continental US. But as we all know, climate change is going to further exacerbate our water extremes. So there are kind of a few major ways that I'm going to touch on that climate change is affecting water supply. So first, we're going to have rising temperatures, and that's going to increase evapotranspiration rates across the state. So it's going to make plants thirstier, and it's going to drive more loss of surface water to evaporation. So the redder parts of this map indicate where temperatures in the state are going to increase the most. Importantly, the Sierras and the Central Valley are areas where that's going to occur, and that's going to have serious implications, which I will expand on. Also, we're going to have a shrinking snowpack, and that's going to lead to much less water storage of this really important water supply. Because of increased water temperatures, or increased temperatures, the snowpack that is remaining will be melting much earlier in the season, in the winter, and that's not when we need it. We need it in the spring and summer when farms in the Central Valley are needing that water to irrigate crops. So this map shows kind of the anticipated changes in Sierra snowpack, with the darker orange areas showing the areas with the most loss. And rain and snow will be falling in shorter, more intense periods. This is going to result in extreme runoff that's difficult to capture, and that will contribute to more extreme flood events. So this chart shows the expected change in rainfall patterns, with the gray as historic and the blue line as future conditions. So with climate change, we're going to have more water falling in shorter periods of time, and less gentle rain in the shoulder months, and more flashy rains in the winter. So overall, more volatility and more periods of either extreme drought conditions or extreme flood events. Okay, so now that I've touched on how climate change is affecting water supply, let's touch on kind of some of the basic facts around California water. Who uses how much, where do our supplies come from, and how is the system working or not across sectors. So we have three primary water uses as shown here. The water for the environment, that's, water that's in rivers and goes to wetlands, that's shown here as royal blue. And then we have agricultural irrigation as light blue. And then the urban use, which is for households and industry, that's shown here in green. So half of the water that would otherwise flow through rivers and streams in California is diverted for human uses, both to support the most productive agricultural region in the country and to sustain a growing population of 40 million people. Of the water that goes to human uses, 20% of that goes to urban uses. That's residential, commercial, landscaping, and then 80% goes to irrigated cropland. So EDF's water program really focuses on those big areas of the environmental water and the agricultural water, which is where we think there's the greatest need for change and the greatest opportunity to make a positive difference. So not as much focus on the urban sector. As a state, we've made significant progress towards becoming more efficient with our water use, particularly when it comes to urban water use. Southern California is certainly the model for water use efficiency. They've been able to maintain their water use generally for decades, even as the population has continued to grow. There's some question about how much more we can eke out in terms of conservation on the urban end of things. There's an increased focus on where we can find more efficiency in other sectors, particularly in agriculture. So, where does all this water come from and how does it get to our cities and farms? So much of our water comes as precipitation that falls as rain or snow in the Sierras and then drains into our rivers and streams, down through the foothills, across the Central Valley floor, and then eventually through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and then out to the Pacific Ocean. So the Delta is outlined here in red, and this is where a huge portion of the state's water drains through and then either travels either out to the Pacific Ocean, or the bulk of it really travels out through the Delta, south to the Central Valley to farms, or to Southern California to cities. A lot of the water management decisions that are made throughout the state impact conditions in the Delta. And so some of you may have, if you're following water issues, there have been decades of protracted debates around the timing and volume of water that comes in and through and out of the Delta and what that has done to Delta ecosystems. And climate change is definitely making these debates heat up again as we speak. While we're seeing, what we're seeing is that because of climate change and increased temperatures in stream for species and how we're operating Delta operations and our water system kind of writ large, and the presence of invasive species, those factors combined have really put our native freshwater fishes at risk. We've seen a staggering decline in native freshwater fish populations, including salmon and steelhead. And today we have over 40% of our native fish species are highly vulnerable or extinct, with more projected to be vulnerable in the decades to come. While I'm on the topic of aquatic habitat decline, it's important to point out that the development of our water management system has had impacts on other water-dependent ecosystems. So over the past century, vast development of our water system, including the expansion of agriculture in the Central Valley, has resulted in a significant decline in wetlands and riparian habitat. Riparian habitat are those kind of trees and vegetation that we see adjacent to our rivers and streams that play a really important role in cooling in-stream temperatures that's important for a lot of wildlife. Today, only a fraction of the Central Valley's once expansive wetlands and riparian habitats remain, and that's putting an especially significant stress on a whole array of at-risk species that need this habitat to be able to adapt to climate change stressors like increased temperatures. Today, more than 240 freshwater species in California are either endangered or vulnerable to extinction, and drought stresses are, clearly putting these species at even more risk. Okay, so far I've mostly been talking about surface water supplies, and now I want to shift to a really critical part of our water supply system that often goes unnoticed, and that is groundwater. It's critically important for both our water supply, but also for our water storage system. So because there's such variability in our precipitation, it's really important that when it's available, we capture flows and store water so that we have water available, in times of shortage like we're in now. So there has been, and some of you have probably heard it, ongoing debate about the need for more surface water storage. California has hundreds of man-made dams designed to store water and in some cases generate hydroelectricity. These are very, very important, and these reservoirs combined store enough water to fill 1 million football fields with 50 feet of water. So that's really, really impressive and important. But the storage capacity of all of these reservoirs in the state pales in comparison to the underground storage capacity in our state's groundwater aquifers, which are currently going largely unutilized. Over 850 million acre feet of water could be stored in our groundwater basins, which is more than 17 times the capacity of our above ground storage systems. So it's a critically important part of our overall water system in California. So this schematic kind of generally shows how groundwater fits within our water system. Water from rain and snowmelt and agricultural return flows and rivers can seep through the soil and percolate into the aquifers, which is the dark blue area at the bottom of the schematic. Groundwater aquifers, serve a really important role as a, valuable, relatively free underground water savings account where water can be stored in wet years and then withdrawn in dry years, historically providing a really important dry year buffer. In normal years, 40% of our water supply comes from groundwater, and in critically dry years, 60% or more comes from groundwater. And ecologically, groundwater is really important in providing freshwater flows to rivers and wetlands when that connection exists. But when more water is extracted, then recharged year after year, we can draw down the savings account to the point that the aquifers are critically overdrafted. And that's exactly what's been happening in California's Central Valley, where on average, 2 million acre feet of water is annually withdrawn more than is put back into the groundwater aquifers. So that's enough drinking water to provide, the whole county of LA water for a year. And today, groundwater depletion in California has really reached a crisis point. The impacts are being felt by rural communities, by the agricultural sector, ecosystems, the economy. They're all, very much dependent on a reliable source of groundwater. Shockingly, groundwater pumping has not been historically managed or regulated in California. Therefore, this aquifer savings account has been overdrafted. This map shows kind of the extent of this overdraft throughout the state. The southern part of the Central Valley, or the San Joaquin Valley as it's known, has a large portion of those groundwater basins are critically overdrafted. And then the other half of the valley has medium and high priority basins, which are still in a state of overdraft. So there have been, because of this groundwater overdraft, there have been significant impacts that have been felt throughout the valley, including wetlands and rivers being dewatered, because as you take water out of groundwater, if there's that connection there, that just completely can pull water out of rivers. We've also seen impaired groundwater quality. We've seen land sinking literally dozens of feet in the valley. I was just talking to John and Terry the other day about a New York Times article that featured a story about what's happening in the town of Corcoran, and I highly recommend you check it out because it's unbelievable how the overpumping of groundwater has impacted that particular area. But it's not a unique story because that's happening throughout the valley. And unfortunately, we're also seeing drinking water wells for disadvantaged communities dried up. And on that point, unmanaged groundwater pumping has disproportionately impacted rural communities and communities of color throughout the valley, most of whom rely 100% on groundwater for their water needs. So the purple dots on this map show all the households that reported shortages during the last drought, and the yellow dots show those water systems that applied for funding during the last drought. And those are water systems supporting these disadvantaged communities. It's frankly pretty shocking that in the 5th largest economy in the world, we still have over 1 million Californians lacking access to clean and affordable drinking water. And as you can imagine, these water access issues are felt most acutely during times of drought, such as in this last drought, folks had to truck bottled water in. And I'm already hearing stories from this last month that communities are starting to have to truck water in again once again. So this is just a repeat of a tragic situation happening in the valley that really shouldn't be happening in a state with an economy like ours. So, the situation reached a boiling point during our last drought. California finally became the last state in the West to pass legislation to mandate sustainable management of our groundwater resources by 2045. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or as we call it, SGMA, we consider it the most significant water legislation to pass in the last century in California. A central part of that legislation is that groundwater management is best accomplished at the local level. I can say with some confidence that the legislation would not have passed if it did not include that provision. So because of that, there was the creation of groundwater sustainability agencies throughout the valley who are now overseeing the development and ultimately the implementation of sustainability plans. So implementation is firmly in their hands. And I will give you a sneak preview of some of our approaches that EDF is taking. We have recognized that local capacity to actually address this issue adequately, it has been limited. So that's one role that EDF has been playing, which I'll touch on shortly. I'll touch on it now. Okay, so EDF's California Water Program is really aimed at advancing collaborative and pragmatic strategies to build, again, resilience in our water supply system. So we're doing that. And I'll just mention our overarching objective is to create tools and guidance and approaches that are pragmatic and replicable to help create a path for agriculture to transition to using less water, and to do that in ways that will protect and create benefits for disadvantaged communities and ecosystems. So we're doing this through a number of ways, through pilot projects where we're working directly with stakeholders on the ground to test out some of our approaches and then scale those approaches for greater impact. We're doing this by improving water data, and I will touch on both of these, OpenET and our work on developing a water accounting and trading platform. We're also developing guidance on those issue areas where we think it's going to be most challenging and where we think we have particular expertise to lend. And this issue of the changing agricultural landscape is one issue that I will also touch on. And then finally, we are working with rural and disadvantaged communities to improve their understanding of water issues and help equip communities with the tools and resources to be effective advocates in water decision making, which has very much not included their voices to date. So I'll just first start off with a tool that we've created, OpenET. We're very excited about it. We're soon to go live with this tool. ET stands for evapotranspiration. So every day, thousands of people across the West make decisions about water, whether it's farmers or local water managers or state or federal planners. And with less water to go around, folks are being asked to do more with less. So this makes having really good data and information that much more important. And after all, you can't manage what you don't measure. So currently, decision makers lack a consistent, kind of timely data set on one of the most important pieces of information for water management, and that's the amount of water that is consumed by crops and other vegetation as they grow. So OpenET is really aiming to fill this huge data gap. Over the last few years, we've worked with NASA and the Desert Research Institute, USGS, USDA, and others to develop this online platform that will make satellite-based water data widely accessible and actionable in 17 Western states. And ultimately, I think the plan is to also go global with this tool. And as I mentioned, we're going to be going live with this tool this summer, and that's going to help enable a whole wide range of water conservation tools to be effectively implemented. We've also been working to help farmers do more with less by giving them more flexibility with the water they have. And one example is providing ways for them to buy and sell water when it makes sense for them, and to do so in ways that doesn't impact ecosystems and community drinking water supplies. So for example, if you're farming alfalfa, which is an annual crop, and you have the flexibility to not grow it this year because we're in a drought, you might see that it's beneficial or profitable to sell your water to a grower of, say, permanent crops like grapes or orchards or walnuts or almonds. And those permanent crops need to be irrigated every year, or those assets are stranded. So having this flexibility in the system is really important. But in order to be able to create these trading programs, farmers and water districts first need to know how much water they have to work with. You need really good water accounting in place. And in many cases, this sort of accounting system does not exist. So we partnered with a water district in Kern County, and that's in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley, where it is ground zero for groundwater overdraft. And we recently launched an open source water accounting and trading platform. And so this platform allows growers in the district access to information as shown here, about their water supply, which in and of itself is helpful just in improving water management. We've also taken it a step further and included kind of a Craigslist-like dashboard that allows growers to find other growers who are interested in either buying and selling water, and to help those transactions happen within the district. It's worth noting that this platform includes a decision support tool that allows these potential trades of groundwater pumping credits to happen, to model these potential trades in advance so that you can understand how changes in water levels might impact the drinking water well of a disadvantaged community or groundwater dependent ecosystem. So it's really important to be able to kind of understand what the impacts of the potential trade might have before you actually let that proceed. And we're super excited that just this past month or so ago, we announced a really exciting partnership with the state of California to take this accounting and trading platform, build out the functionality a bit, and make it widely available to sustainability agencies throughout the state, thereby basically scaling what we've done in this one pilot program. And like everything else I've mentioned, this is definitely a tool that we're exploring right now in terms of bringing it to other regions in the West that have these sorts of needs in how they're managing their water supply. So, while we're working to help farmers do more with less, and those strategies are going to be really, really important. It's also clear with climate change, the agricultural footprint will have to be reduced one way or another. There are questions about how much that reduction is going to look like, but a reduction in the agricultural footprint will have to happen in order for groundwater sustainability to be achieved. There are estimates in California that 500,000 acres to 1 million acres or more, basically the size of Yosemite National Park, of farmland will likely have to go out of production over the next couple decades in order to achieve groundwater sustainability in the state. So, we kind of describe it that Central Valley is at a really critical fork in the road right now. On one path, without the right interventions, you could see farmers out of desperation, and this is already starting to happen, taking land out of production. They don't have the water available. There's not really a strategy to it. They're just taking land out of production. It's happening somewhat haphazardly, where we could end up with this patchwork of idled fields throughout the valley that are kicking up dust, impairing already impaired air quality, and creating areas of pests and weeds, basically putting remaining ag lands at risk. Or on another path, which is definitely what we're promoting, the valley could transform into what we call a water resilient agricultural region, thriving among a whole mosaic of land uses that farmers can be paid for producing, and that can keep them in business and farm workers working, and can create better outcomes for the valley writ large. So to address this challenge, EDF is currently sponsoring legislation. If you're interested, it's AB 252. And we're aiming to turn this daunting challenge into a new opportunity for farmers and rural communities. So the legislation would establish a multi-benefit land repurposing incentive program, and that would enable farmers to receive payments for voluntarily reducing how much groundwater they're pumping and repurposing some of their land to create new uses that don't require as much water. And some of those new uses are listed on this slide. Things like grazing, dry land agriculture, and cover crops. A big one, groundwater recharge, that can create multiple benefits. You can design groundwater recharge basins in ways that they provide surrogate wetland habitat, which is desperately needed throughout the valley. They can also reduce flood risk by capturing flood flows when they're available. Low impact solar, recreation for rural communities, that's also desperately needed. These open spaces are very hard to come by in the valley. And then, of course, we're really interested in the potential to create habitat corridors. Right now, we have kind of these islands of habitat that exist that I mentioned are making it really challenging for species to be able to adapt to the stressors of climate change. We want to be able to, on a voluntary basis, allow farmers to get paid for creating habitat that's adjacent to existing areas and essentially create that connectivity that does not currently exist in the valley. We were initially hoping to secure $30 million for this program, but as part of Governor Newsom's $5.1 billion drought response package, he also proposed $500 million for this purpose, with the intent for it to go through this program that we are advocating for. Negotiations are currently underway between the state and the legislature, and we'll know by August or September what the outcome is for the bill and for the funding that can be appropriated to it. But $500 million, it is an amazing amount of money that we never thought would be possible. But I'll just say, addressing this issue at the scale that the valley is facing is a multi-billion-dollar challenge. So this could be in the $3 to $4 billion range ultimately. So we're hoping we get that much secured right now. A lot more is going to be needed in the future. So far, we have a lot of support from agricultural coalitions and environmental justice groups and water agencies. And what we're designing here certainly could have application in other places where there's that intersection of irrigated irrigated lands and facing this issue of water scarcity and the need to decrease the agricultural footprint. We think that there's going to be application and need for this certainly across the West, and also probably globally as well. So one final part of our California work that I'll touch on is focused on ensuring that water decision making includes the voices and perspectives of vulnerable communities who have not historically been part of those decisions. For the past several years, we've worked with local community-based organizations to host the Leadership Institute, which is basically a program that is aimed at equipping community members with within the Central Valley with an understanding of their local and state water issues, regulations, and we basically train them to be effective advocates for their water needs. We've held a number of these multi-month trainings in Central Valley to date, and now we just launched our first virtual training due to COVID. And our hope is that graduates of this program can become board members of their small water systems. They can actively engage in the development of these sustainability plans, and they can look to each other as a network of peers where they can learn from each other and really solve some of these challenges collectively. I think now I'm going to broaden it. So now I'm going to just zoom back out of California and touch a little bit on some of the water challenges brought on by climate change that are being felt across the West. This is a photo of my colleague Chris Kuzdis with Stephen Rowe Lewis, the governor of the Gila River Indian tribe, who was instrumental in helping reach a drought agreement for the Colorado River in 2019. So the Colorado River Basin is a critical source of water for 2 countries and 7 states. The river supports 40 million people, a lot of jobs, 5.5 million acres of farmland, national parks, 29 federally recognized tribes, and of course it's the source of electrical generating capacity. This area, not surprisingly, is also facing increased temperatures, which are being supercharged by climate change. Some experts are saying that the term drought is a misnomer. The more appropriate term is aridification, because climate is becoming permanently more arid, and you can see that how that is taking place in this region on this map. Last year, climate scientists found the Southwest had been experiencing a mega drought, with 2000 to 2018 being the driest 19-year span since the late 1500s, so in 500 years, which is pretty incredible. Just last weekend, the first major heat wave of the season hit the Southwest, with temperatures in Phoenix hitting 115 degrees and Las Vegas reaching 110. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area and it's 108, which is ridiculous. This is an image of Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas. This is the largest reservoir in the country and supplies Colorado River water to Nevada, Arizona, California, and Mexico. It's now at a record low level, just at 36% of capacity. And you can see here the bathtub ring of showing how high the water used to go. So further reductions in the storage level will trigger major cuts in water allotments next year for Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico. But even as water supplies decline, the population is continuing to grow in many areas of the Colorado River Basin. Fortunately, water use per person has gone down. For instance, Phoenix. In Phoenix, the average resident used about 29% less water in 2014 than they did in 1990. In California, again, in the last drought, average residential water use declined 30%. And while that's somewhat ticked up a bit since the drought, Californians used 16% less water in recent months than they did in 2013. So there is kind of a trend towards more efficiency on kind of the urban water use end of things. And you know, like the theme in California of the importance of groundwater, that is certainly the case in the Colorado River Basin as well. In some states, cuts in surface water are putting even more pressure on groundwater supplies, which are already at risk. And I mentioned this happening in California, but it's also certainly happening in Arizona, where wells are going dry from overpumping. And this map shows kind of the varying degrees Colorado River Basin states are relying on groundwater. New Mexico, there's a 50-50% split, and then Nevada and Arizona are kind of next up. So these are some of the headlines we're seeing across the West right now. Some states are, exploring a wide range of strategies right now. You know, some are probably better than others. Nevada, for instance, just passed a new law to outlaw 30% of the grass in Las Vegas to conserve water in response to this imminent Colorado River cut. And in Colorado, we were involved in the passage of a bill that legalized sports betting and dedicated revenue towards the implementation of water projects. It's also worth mentioning there are also some not so great ideas out there. Some lawmakers in Arizona are calling for increased water conservation, while others are also asking for a study of a pipeline to bring water from the Mississippi River to the Colorado River for Arizona. So there's a range of ideas that are out there, which probably we should see as some hope of, innovation coming to mind.
And we have a lot of questions that are out there. How are we doing on time?
I'm wrapping up. I've got three more slides. Okay. So unfortunately, the West is not alone in experiencing water scarcity. This is also a looming global water crisis. Cape Town, I'm sure you all were following that. It was probably the most dramatic example of a water crisis. And that the day that city would have shut off water to 4 million people was called Day Zero. Unfortunately, because of changing habits and setting limits on water use, both in the ag and urban sectors, and the fact that it rained, they were able to avert that crisis. But climate scientists are saying this is a sign of what's to come in other cities across the world. This map, I just want you to quickly focus on that. This map is showing kind of the dark red color is where groundwater aquifer levels are declining the most. So without, extensive interventions, it's expected that 2 billion more people around the world will live in areas with high water stress by 2050. So some of the groundwater hotspots the EDF is focusing on exploring. The expansion of our work too is India, most notably in the north, and China in the northeast. And we're also exploring bringing some of our strategies and approaches to Mexico, where in Mexico City, there are images, you can see buildings literally collapsing as the land is sinking from over pumping. So this is a starting point to a discussion, some ideas of things that you can all do as individuals and perhaps as an organization. Everyone, can take control of their own water use at home, whether it's how you're using water for landscaping or within, your household water uses. Learning more about your local and state water system, and engaging in writing to legislators and testifying in hearings, organizing within your communities. Those are all readily available ideas of ways to lean in. And then also as an organization, if there is a desire, which I've kind of gotten the sense of from corresponding with John, to to lean in more on working at the local level. There is a huge gap in local capacity, particularly among vulnerable communities, to be effective advocates for their drinking water needs, for their water needs writ large. So similar to the work that I mentioned about the Leadership Institute, there is a need for that sort of capacity building in many areas across the West, and I'm sure it's also the case globally as well. So with that, I will open it up for discussion.